Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast presented by Strategic Treasurer, your source for interesting Treasury news, analysis, and insights in your car, at the gym, or wherever you decide to tune in. On this episode of the Stories from the Front series, host Craig Jeffery joins Lena Pennington, Director of Sales Engineering at Bellin, and Lee-Ann Perkins, Assistant Treasurer at ION Geophysical, to discuss how they successfully managed through the onset of the COVID-19 disruption. They share valuable insights and effective strategies around working from home, relationship management, liquidity planning, technology solutions, and more. Listen in to find out how you and your organization can stay resilient and seize opportunities on the path to recovery.
Welcome to the Treasury Update podcast. This is Craig Jeffery, your host today. Welcome, Lena and Lee-Ann.
Thank you so much for having us, Craig. I'm excited to be on this here with you and Lee-Ann today.
Thank you. Yes, it's great to be partnering again with Strategic Treasurer and Bellin.
You know, this idea of the stories from the front, you heard the preamble to the the series about dealing with the disruption that occurs, how companies and providers are working through things. You know, as we began in March, people moved to this work from home environment. And I wanted to start off maybe with you, Lena, about what worked well or worked more or less seamlessly at the start.
Right, Craig. Yeah, so that's a good question. I think it was such an interesting and will always be a memorable time for all of us. Is you go from being in the office one day and you hear in the news and all of a sudden you have the announcement, okay, everybody's working from home. And I think that's where, without any preparation time, companies that had put cloud-based systems for whatever kind in place were really ready for this, right? Because you can access it from anywhere and you're really not tied to any specific location. So really, the trend that we had seen leading up to the past few months, that companies are moving really everything to the cloud, has really paid off. And so we haven't really seen too much of a disruption for our client base just because we are a cloud-based provider. But yeah, so that went really seamlessly. Obviously, technology is just the tool you use. At the end of the day, it was the economy, right, that was most affected in our work life. So knowing, what the tool provides you is the visibility, right? Is knowing exactly, hold on, this situation just hit us. Where exactly is our cash across the entire globe? And how can I concentrate that information to make it useful for management, right? It's always, Treasury works kind of in the background until the crisis hits, and then you have to be there, right? You have to have your ducks in a row. And so the liquidity has really been the focus we've seen over the past few months. And many of our clients have stated to us that having a treasury management system in place has really been a lifesaver. The one thing that we have found from a technology perspective is some of the security features that were put in place by some of our clients that specifically requested that in the past were things like IP address whitelisting. And now everyone's working from different locations. That doesn't work anymore, right? From one day to the next, this IT security idea is not a good idea at all anymore. So we had to deactivate that for some of our clients. But other than that, things have gone quite seamlessly.
Yeah, some really good points there about everything from whitelisting to, everything that people have been working on for years about being remote makes, and working seamlessly makes a lot of sense. And I know, as a provider, you're providing those services, work anywhere. And Lee-Ann, I know you've had some experiences too with everyone working from home. What did you find worked particularly well from your perspective?
So we were lucky, first of all, the company was concerned about the employee safety. So fortunately, we have a really great QHSE department that put in place good protocols. They followed CDC and local government procedures and also communicated this very well to the employees. So from a treasury perspective, I can say that our work was completed on time. We definitely learned some new skills during this time period. And I also had some really proud moments where I was actually able to witness some plans that we had put in place a year to 2 years ago, and was able to demonstrate that success occurs where opportunity meets preparation. And one example, which lends itself to today's podcast topic, is the adoption of digital solutions. And this allowed the Treasury Department specifically to quickly adapt to working remotely and ensure that we met the requirements of the Treasury Department and the needs of the business. And I agree with everything that Lena just said about having access to the cloud-based system. And during these difficult times, we had to go through COVID and the oil price decline in my industry. So the company's immediate focus was on the preservation of cash and liquidity. And to relay information to the C-suite and our management, we needed timely and accurate data. So one of the solutions we relied upon was the Bellin cloud-based Treasury workstation. And being cloud-based, as Lena said, you really don't have to worry about your servers being in the office and your employees and your IT staff are at home. So we really didn't concern ourselves with connectivity, and we felt secure knowing that the cash information would be available whenever we needed it. And as a global company, we have to know exactly where the cash is and in what currency it's in. And having the system really allowed us to quickly aggregate and display the information at the start of each day, allowing us to make decisions quickly and accurately.
Yeah, so what, and maybe we'll start in reverse order and begin with you, Lee-Ann. It's like, what would it have been like if you didn't have access remotely to see your position, to manage forecast, access, not just your treasury system, but some of the other systems that you use. Well, and you also deal with other parties who may be disrupted from working remotely, banks, et cetera.
Right. So that sends shivers down my spine, the thought of that. So I think it would have been quite troubling, honestly. For us in the Treasury Department, it would have meant a lot of manual work, a lot of verification of numbers, much longer hours. And I think what would have been the major concern for me would have been that decisions could have been made on information that was not accurate and complete. And I think also with the reduction in staff that we faced this year, I don't know how we would have managed if we weren't able to automate as much. And functionally, the Treasury team, prior to being automated, we would have had to log into many bank portals to retrieve cash balances and transaction information. We would then have to spend time aggregating it and verifying details. And then there's always the risk of these systems being down, or like Lena mentioned with the IP address whitelisting. And then there's the issue of not being able to access any banks when you're using tokens and something goes wrong with those tokens. And I bring that up because I actually did have that situation. I was trying to make a payment via a bank portal for one of our global banks. And incidentally, I'm the backup to the backup. And so lo and behold, as 2020 would have it, my token stopped working and the other two employees were on vacation. So that's definitely a lesson learned that we've now corrected. But because the bank was overseas and we're in different time zones, and due to COVID, the bank had different banking hours. So it really took me a couple of days and a lot of international phone calls to get the token working again. And I say this because, it's one thing if your payments are delayed a couple of days, you can manage that. But not knowing your cash balances dynamically, it can really have a disastrous impact on your business. So having a cloud-based solution such as the TMS, it allowed us to get our bank balances and our transactions via Swift messaging every day quickly without the need to log into any bank portal.
And Lena, I wanted to ask you, shift our conversation to managing relationships. This idea of there's a disruption, you want to help your clients, you have to obviously help your coworkers, there's projects, there's activities. What did you do to help manage relationships with your clients and I guess even some of your prospective clients?
Right. So that's a good question. I remember that when mid-March, really COVID hit us all and we went home and we started seeing the first signs of the economy. We reached out to all of our clients to just let them know we're here for you. So each of us kind of has a number of clients that we're directly responsible for, just keeping in touch. And we just sent them a note to say, here, we're here for you. You probably have other things going on, but let us know if we can help you. And the next thing was that we put in weekly webinars for prospects as well as clients to kind of give them a quick training tutorial of, if you want to use this, this is what it does. This is how you can get your cash balances. And this is how you can see your funding. And this is how you can see it a combination, how you can model what if our revenues go down, what is kind of the assumptions that we need to make to find out what additional funding we need, or how can we support our management in making tough decisions like furloughs and so on. So that's another measure we took in trying to support our clients. And I believe that Lee-Ann's team was able to actually participate in some of those webinars as you had a new team member. Is that right, Lee-Ann?
That's correct. And the offerings of these online webinars and the on-demand training from Bellin was really invaluable to this time. And I myself took those courses, and like you mentioned, we had a new person in the department from the beginning of March. So it really helped us give her a way to access the training and to find out, what Bellin is offering. And also there were some system upgrades, and there was some really useful information that we could participate in. So we do appreciate the teamwork from providers, and it's really appreciated when we're under time constraints. We don't have the luxury of learning a new system and going step by step through a process. So as you mentioned, the quick 45-minute training session or just discussion with other members as to what they're doing and what they're looking for was very helpful to us. And I had mentioned previously that during implementation of the system, the Treasury Manager at ION and Bellin project team actually created us a desktop instruction manual. And this too was very valuable as we went through the stage of trying to figure out what else we could get from the system. But these online trainings and support from our providers have been very helpful. So thank you for that.
Yeah, some really good comments. And circling back to you, Lena, so you did a lot of webinars, including on liquidity management and running different models. Was that the most popular webinar you had, or were there other ones that people were clamoring for, and especially as they moved to work from home and dealing with some of the crisis or disruptions that happened?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It was definitely the most popular webinar and the one we focused on most, because anyone that we spoke to, either in our network in general of treasurers, whether it's a prospect, a client, or someone we just know in the industry, everybody was talking about the risk of liquidity, right? And so that was the primary focus. Some of the other topics, and I think, Lee-Ann, you've mentioned it before as well, is, fraud never sleeps. So that has been another topic that our clients have been asking about and prospects have been coming to us about is, whenever there's a disruption globally like this, fraudsters know this, and they know that if things are not standard, then it's much easier to make a successful fraud attempt. So the payment side on that has been a topic we've been discussing a lot as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I'll just respond with a couple things to that, Lena. So, Bellin is a member of the Treasury Coalition, one of the first members when over 20 organizations and Treasury got together to figure out how do we monitor and see what's going on and work through the disruption as everyone moved to work from home and the crisis hit different areas of the country. So definitely thanks to you and your team there for being part of that, helping the overall industry.
I was going to add to that, Craig, that I think what this time across all aspects has really promoted is the mindset of community, right? We're all affected by this, and we all have to, we're all going to get through this better if we work together, whether it's in the community that we live in, right? If everyone keeps social distancing measures, then perhaps this will go over quicker. if we work together across technology providers and strategic treasury is so great in bringing that together, right? These different industry partners. So I think, and also, I think, Lee-Ann, you mentioned it again in your prior podcast, which I recommend everyone listen to because it was so valuable. But you mentioned how you have the coffee breaks with the CEO and how important transparency is. And maybe in a normal day-to-day business, that's not quite as important, or we don't value as quite as much. But when everyone's a bit scared, and having that transparency and, breaking down departmental silos and so on and coming together as a community in different ways, I think is really valuable right now.
Let's shift over to disruption to technology firms, how this has disrupted technology firms. So what's been the impact to Bellin? How did you experience that from your client side?
It has been really not too much of a disruption at all, actually. I think due to the fact that we are a cloud-based provider, and like so many of them, they've been the tools and the companies that businesses have gone to now during this time, right? And so for our clients, there really has been a limited disruption. I just received another email today from a client saying how seamlessly everything has gone over the past months because they have a cloud-based TMS, right? So we haven't seen any increase in support cases. It's really been just supporting clients, making sure that, as usual, that they know how to use the tool, and if they need to add things, we just, Lee-Ann, you mentioned the token issue that you've had. So we have existing clients that have expanded their use of the system. And I think that the way that business cases for technology in general will be presented now and going forward will be quite different compared to what it was back then, right? Because what used to be a nice to have is now really a must have. And we've seen that. And so it changes the conversation, I think.
Yeah, and some other disruption that happened to Bellin during this time, there's a company called Coupa. When did that occur?
Yeah. So Bellin was acquired by Coupa at the beginning of June. Yeah, and I think it's, Coupa is a US-based company that really, owns and redefines the business spend management side of software. And I think the idea of adding treasury as a complementary product has come from their existing client base as well as from the market, in that, business spend is one side of the coin, right? Is how do we control costs, which is really important these days as well. But then there's also the inflow side, right? And treasury is responsible for all cash flow, not just for the outflows. And so I think the two products are quite complementary, and we're all really excited about how we will continue working together in the synergies that our clients can make use of it.
Yeah, it's been a busy 6 months so far in the COVID environment. I wanted to also touch about project management, project activity, and Lee-Ann, perhaps start with you on what's going on with projects. Have they sped up, slowed down, shifted dramatically? I was just wondering if you could just share some of the thoughts on what you've had to do on projects, and then I'll move back over to you, Lena, on the same type of issue with your client projects.
Sure. So some of our projects are dependent on customer budgets, and this is on the operations side. So a lot of them have been put on pause until the oil and gas E&P companies have clarity on their spend. Then there have been some projects that have been unaffected, especially on the finance side. We still have to work on some strategic projects. And then there's some new projects that I never saw coming, such as the PPP and other government loan programs. So that was an interesting learning experience, and glad we've gone through that. But I think, from the project side, I think taking a step back, I think what we've seen this year is that those companies who adopted the adage, fund early and fund long, by either refinancing credit agreements or loans before they need them and were able to store up cash and build up reserves, they've really been able to get through this time and have been able to manage the unexpected turbulence a little better. So I really think it's about, as a project is, preparing for the unexpected. And I think it's also good to get Treasury involved from the beginning. We have some good ideas. We function very well in changing environments because inherent in our job, we're trained to be future-looking and manage risk. So my advice, on the project side for Treasury is to really fight hard for projects that will pay benefits. When you have the budget, don't delay the projects. Automation and efficiency projects always pay forward. I think don't wait until you need the project because often that's too late. And like this year we've seen, it's like trying to buy a bicycle or dumbbells in the height of COVID pandemic. It's either going to be impossible to do or it's going to cost you way more than your budget.
Very good example. Yeah, we probably had 5 years worth of dumbbell sales. Some good examples there, Lena, with the project activity. I mean, you're constantly working with your clients on implementing and doing that. I know it looks different. The way that you do that tends to look a little different in the Europe versus US and Canada versus other locations. Can you give us any guidance on how that changed during these past 6 months?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the US, as you mentioned, things have always really been largely remote for us. Especially in the past few years, we've seen an entire shift to just doing implementations remotely. So there hasn't been a disruption on that side, really. Most of the clients that had started project continued them. There were maybe a few weeks of a bit of a pause just to recollect and focus on making sure the business can continue running. But there hasn't really been a stop or a halt to any of the projects. What we have seen in Europe is that due to the geographic makeup of Europe, people tend to visit each other or do business implementations locally more so than remotely. So in Europe, they had to adapt a bit more. But I think everybody is more and more open to that now, and they see that it works. So it'll be interesting to watch if we can see a permanent shift in that even in Europe. What we have noticed in terms of the types of projects is that everybody's concerned about reducing cost, right? With revenue going down is let's control costs and reduce costs. So we've seen a lot of focus on measures that Treasury can impact on saving costs. So one of that is the intercompany netting, right? It's really just an internal measure that you can take that allows you to reduce the number of intercompany payments you make, so you save bank fees, right? So a very simple, really in concept, a simple topic where we've seen a few Treasury teams pick that up during this time.
Yeah, really good points. And as we wrap up this particular episode on stories from the front and what you've learned, I wanted to see if, Lee-Ann, you could maybe start us off with what would be a key message or a few learning points you would leave with people. What's essential?
Sure. So we all know this year has been pretty difficult and challenging, but I think it's important for people to anticipate change and disruption. And you do this by planning ahead to avoid being caught off guard. And this also requires having a risk management culture. And risk is everyone's responsibility in the company. So wherever you have control, you should take responsibility for that risk and help to manage the company through these trying times. And for the Treasury Department, that means actively monitoring your credit risks, putting plans into action to safeguard the company's assets, the company's cash, its reputation, and really at the end of the day, its future. And I think too that this year we all have come to know that remote working is going to be the norm for some period of time. Even for companies that did not previously embrace remote working. And we've definitely had some unique situations with working from home, but I think that it's learning to adapt to it. I think it's also being excited about the new developments that these type of crises bring to us. And even as the world changes, the opportunities are endless. You really should be using technology sharing information, using your networks, and also just looking for areas that it can benefit you personally, it can benefit your company, and it can also benefit your profession. And in the midst of every crisis, I believe lies great opportunity. You should move as quickly as you can, get as much done as you can, and write the next chapter and enjoy it.
Lena, well, how about you? What would you like to leave the audience with from an advice standpoint?
Yeah, firstly, fully agree with Lee-Ann. I'm interested to see how the culture, or if the culture of work in general, will change with some of the adaptations that we've had to do due to COVID. But from my perspective, really the one thing that I think will change going forward compared to the kind of conversations that we've had in the past is technology is no longer nice to have. You can't afford not to have it, right? It's like Lee-Ann mentioned as well, is if you can't answer your CEO or your CFO on what cash you have right now, and you don't have the tools in place, you didn't do your job right. So when jobs are on the line and the crisis hits, you really want to be prepared. So not being prepared is just not a luxury we can't afford to have anymore. And so I'll join Lee-Ann in saying, let's get resilient, let's get prepared, and enjoy the ride while we can, right?
Yes, very good. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Lee-Ann. Really appreciate you participating in this episode on Stories from the Front.
You've reached the end of another episode of the Treasury Update podcast. Be sure to follow Strategic Treasurer on LinkedIn. Just search for Strategic Treasurer. This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.